Denise, I'd love to start by asking you about the second murderer. How did it come about? And why did you decide to do Raymond Chandler?
Well, I was asked, my agent said, we've been approached, would you like to do this? And he said, they've never had a woman, because there've been quite a few. And I said, he said, I don't know if you want to do it because he's a bit misogynistic and a bit racist. And I said, I really want to, and that's why. Because I really wanted to, because I love Chandler so much. And I wanted to sort of, go back to the early Philip Marlowe and write a Chandler book that people like me could read without flinching. Because he is quite racist,
He is really racist, isn't he?
Yeah.
And misogynistic.
And the women are awful. I mean, the women are terrible. And, at one point, someone says, just understanding of consent and women as having agency and all that stuff. Anyway, but the writing is amazing, and he was really a man of his time. And I thought, if I could do this and make it a bit less cringy, then... And also, I just wanted to be in that world. I mean, if you go online, there are lots of films of LA at that time. Somebody put a movie camera in the front of a car and they just drove around LA, so you can actually see, you can kind of Google map historically, and it's just such a wonderful world.
So, I love it. I think what you've done is absolutely extraordinary. As a proper Raymond Chandler fan, I am. Yeah. When I was 13, I was really unwell, and I had a month off school, and I read Raymond Chandler. That got me through it. Right. But I share all the same misgivings that you and so many of us have today about him. But the writing itself is superlative.
It really is, though. It really is, and you really fall in love with that voice.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, you kind of think, oh.
Yeah, exactly. How did you get it? Because your tone is absolutely spot on, or the phrases. You've got the tone absolutely right. But how did you get that tone without ever falling into pastiche?
Well, I mean, I actually spent a really long time on doing things like listening to all the books, reading all the books. I drew a map of his sentence structure, paragraph by paragraph. He's very interesting the way I really did far too much work.
Yeah. No, this is fascinating. How does he write? Tell us about it.
So I did a sort of map of his paragraphs, right? So he does this thing where he'll have a short sentence. He doesn't like commas. I'm a beast for commas. He doesn't like them. So it's like statement, descriptive paragraph, longer. And if he's ever he does a very clever thing, which is if he ever has like a real killer line, he always puts it at the end of a paragraph. It's a comedian's thing, right? If you're telling a joke, you put the comedy word at the end of the punchline, right? So he observes all those things. But I drew a sort of dash dot map of a lot of his paragraphs to try and get the rhythm of it right. Because although, if you're hearing something in an accent in your head, the rhythm of it has to be right. The sort of the cadence of the phraseology, if you're believing that character is telling you this story, you have to get that right. And really just reading a lot of it and trying to hear things like the vowel sounds that would be used at that time. So there were like two major accents represented in LA at that time. One of them is basically J. Edgar Hoover, who speaks incredibly fast and a kind of staccato kind of way of speaking, and Marlowe is the more languorous kind of European kind of delivery, which I didn't realise that J. Edgar Hoover had a stutter, and that's why he spoke so quickly, and then it became a kind of form of speech that people would adopt, like a vocal fry. Vocal fry? Yeah. Kim Kardashian started talking like that, and that's vocal fry. And it's an affectation that a lot of young people do now, and they say, I can't help my vocal fry, it's just naturally how I speak. But it is a kind of sort of like, something people affect now. But in the 30s, people would speak incredible. And that all came from J. Edgar Hoover, because he was a bit of an influencer.
Wow.
What a boring thing to tell.
No, not at all. It isn't, because, who are our influencers? Look at our influencers today, and back in the 1930s, it was J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, he was a cool guy.
After a fashion. After a fashion.
If you're a fascist.
Yeah, exactly, that's right, yeah. But going back to LA in the this is set in the 40s, isn't it? This one?
But 1939, 1940, I don't want to be too specific. Yeah.
Okay. And so, for example, the description of Skid Row, going through the hotels that you've got, and I've listened on the audiobook, listening to it, and I thought, I imagine what work have you gone to make sure that when they're going down 6th Avenue or Street or whatever it is, that it looked like how you've described it. Can you just describe putting yourself back in LA in 1939, 1940? What did you do?
Well, what is amazing about Skid Row now is quite well known as kind of like a place where a lot of people with drug problems go, right? So there's a lot of tents, there's a lot of sleeping out. At that time, it was right next to the very last train stop across America. So you can imagine lots of people kind of floating in there. The major problem was alcoholism and poverty. But it also, like a lot of those places, a lot of those sort of ghetto places, it was a real mishmash of interesting people who'd floated into California hoping for a better life. The accommodation was, every second door was a cinema, because you would pay a ticket and you'd be in all day. So people would use it as a hotel. And, some of those hotels are still there. But you would go from like the beautiful villas on Bunker Hill, and you would kind of go down, and gradually it would get seedier and seedier. There's a place like that in every major city. And, just the conventions of the place were very different. But a lot of those hotels are still there, but they've kind of been done up and changed,
And did you, for example, look at that 1940s footage? And what did you do to try to mentally map in your own head what it looked like then?
Well, so I got a big map of LA, and I got this fantastic map that's kind of all the places that Chandler set anything in LA, right? So, and LA is very difficult to map now because it's such a different city. There's so much, it's so built up now compared to how it used to be. So, so I got the Chandler map, and I got a normal map, and I did a lot of street view walking to try and work out what had been where. But Skid Row was very well documented at that time. There was a photographer down there taking a lot of contemporaneous photos, and it's all drunk men asleep on the floor, and a lot of the hotels had this kind of fading grandeur. There's always a hope on Skid Row that it's going to get better, so a lot of them are really beautiful deco things. There's a hotel down there where a very famous true crime case happened, and I think it was the most read long-form true crime article on the internet at one point, and it was about a Canadian tourist who had come to LA and booked that hotel, and she stayed there and stopped taking her meds, had a breakdown, and she disappeared. And there was footage in the lift of her talking to somebody, and then she completely vanished. And then a week later, she was found in the water tank on the roof. And Richard Ramirez also stayed in that hotel. I can't remember what it's called. But, it is like, a sort of deep dive. A lot of people will be familiar with it because that was such a big case. And it's such a well-written piece because it's very compassionate and it's very realistic. And also people were very suspicious because the police didn't say anything about it. And the guy interviewed the police, I think, and the police said, we didn't want to upset our mum. Nobody thinks of that. Do you know what I mean? They think the police are withholding, but actually, anyway. But it's an area that's quite familiar from, reading around it and the way it's changed over the years and everything.
Yes. And the plot has got a lot of as you would have to have done, a lot of the tropes that you would expect from a Chandler. So you've got the tycoon, and you've got a missing daughter, a missing heiress, and you've got a couple of femme fatales, and you've got the dodgy cops. And how much did you feel that you had to do that, and how much did you feel that you might be able to break away? Because some of his plots are bonkers and don't make any sense whatsoever, and this does.
Well, I felt maybe I was being unfaithful to him by having a plot that made sense, because that's not really the Chandler way. But there are characters in here from his previous books. So, there's a character who in a previous book wants to work with them. It's a woman, and he says, and she's amazing. She's always wearing these fab outfits, and she owns her own house, and she's independently wealthy. And so she actually got a job in this one, so she reappears in this one. And
she runs the detective agency.
She runs a ladies' detective agency, because who is more invisible than women in 1939? I mean, they can go anywhere. And she's setting up a network of cigarette girls to spy on people. I felt like I did have to do those things because I was writing it for fellow Chandler fans, and I thought, what do I love about the books? What do I want to read about in the books? What is it, what do I mean, if he went off and worked in a factory, I would be disappointed. But the things that I really love about that is, the language, the milieu, the sense of being very tired. Marlowe's sleepy a lot. The high drama. I think Marlowe is a broken-hearted romantic rather than a cynic. He becomes a cynic. But that was one of the things that I found really beguiling in the early books. So I was writing, so a lot of the tropes are in there for people like me who love Chandler. And do you know what I mean? And I felt like, if that felt authentic to somebody like me, then I would have got the, Chandler buzz off it that I wanted.
What pressure did you feel to take it on with the level of expectation that, you can't get this wrong. You have to be good to do it. You have to be of a certain standard to do this. Yeah. What pressure? They're big shoes to fill, aren't they? What pressure did you feel?
Actually, I didn't feel any pressure because, to be honest, I've failed at things and lived. So I just thought, well, I'll give it a go. And you can do things and they don't work. I've done things and they didn't work. And that's fine too, but just do your best. And I think you have to remember who your audience are. Your audience are not, everybody. You're trying to write, who are you trying to write for? And there I was trying to write for fellow Chandler fans. And so it took a bit of forensic investigation to work out what it was I really loved. But then I just did it.
How long did it take to write? And how much was the research of that world and of the Chandlerisms and the study of the language? How much did that take up before you even started writing?
About equal. Actually, I wrote it really quickly, and I wanted to write it really quickly because I think they were written quickly, and I think that gives it a flow. And you can't be precious if you've said, I'm going to hand this in now. So I think maybe I wrote it in about 4 months, and I researched it for about 6 months because I had to read all the books and I had to work out what characters I was going to bring back, and then I had to buy maps and try on outfits. And I meant to go to LA and get a vintage car and drive around, because there's a bit in The Postman Always Rings Twice where the car is quite central. The car overheats on the way up a hill and somebody nearly dies, It's quite central to the plot. It's a bit of sort of, they never really film it because it's quite difficult to explain this is what cars used to do then. So if you went up a hill, the engine would overheat and you'd have to stop, and something really important happens in that. So I really wanted to get the car and make the Oldsmobile part of the plot, but I couldn't because of COVID. So, I tried to write it quite quickly because I think, it gives it a kind of pacing, and you don't want to be you can get caught up in being too precious with it.
Yes.
Yeah, and then the fear sets in.
And it's incredible. I think it's the most incredible achievement. What's your favourite Chandler book?
Oh, The Long Goodbye. You as well?
Yeah, same too. Even though it's his last proper one, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, Poodle Springs doesn't count, does it? I don't think.
No,
really.
it's not finished.
No. But he was completely drunk when he wrote that, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was completely, and he was really melancholy, and it was, I think the editor probably had a lot to do in that.
Yeah.
But just that friendship between him and Terry, and, and it feels real. Do you know what I mean? It really feels real, and it really feels like a man struggling with depression, and, yeah, I just really love that book. I think it's got all of the things. It's very well written, but it also has plot, and I think actually plot really matters. You know, yeah, I think it does matter, and it has a lot of luggage.
Yeah.
And also, it's about someone who's catastrophically drunk a lot of the time, and not reliable. And I wonder if he was talking about himself. You know, and I think it probably killed a lot of people, that book, because, you know, Terry is very, very drunk a lot of the time, but he's also a bit of a hero. And, you know, when I was growing up, very, very drunk men who were not reliable were heroes. That was how to, you know, that was how to be a great guy. And actually, they were just men who were dying of alcoholism. Do you know, they weren't really heroic at all, you know.
And you've been writing, you were first published in 1998, and you've won, oh my God, you won a John Creasy dagger for the best first crime novel for that one, haven't you? And since then you've won the Theakston's Old Peculiar Crime Novel of the Year twice,
yeah,
the subsequent year, and many other things. Why crime? Why crime out of all the things in the world to write about it? Why are you drawn to it?
Well, I think because of Chandler, really. And yeah, I really do. And I think you saying that you were ill and you read Chandler, I think there's something really beautiful about going in under the radar and being part of people's worst times and offering an escape. And, you know, we talk a lot about, you know, high art, low art, and how crime fiction isn't taken seriously. I don't want it to be taken seriously. I don't really want to work in an art form that is taken seriously, because then people come to it with a hand stapled to their chin. Did I enjoy that, or did I understand that? And actually, I want people to be able to read it and say, that's rubbish. I don't mind if people say it's rubbish, as long as they feel empowered. And you know a good story when you read a good story, and there is something really lovely about being in the form that people read when they're very ill, or fed up, or on a holiday with people they don't like, or, you know, just for fun. And I remember I brought out 3 very traditional books in a trilogy, and then I wrote one that was Discovered Diary, and it was a diary that somebody had left on a computer that they'd sold on. It was about a very big case, and it was quite a tricksy book, and it wasn't what was expected, and it had a male protagonist and stuff like that. It just died over here. In America it did very well, but it's a different market. But I met a guy in the street and he said, I read your 4th book. Shite.
Amazon review.
I thought, what a form.
Yes.
I mean, do you know what I mean? That somebody can say, he said, look, I love the other ones, but you did a different thing, and I don't want a different thing, I want the same thing. And I just thought, God, that guy he's not a very empowered man. He's just a reader. And he's just like, that I didn't like, and I feel very strongly about it, and I'm going to tell you. And that's really wonderful. I think that's really, really amazing.
If he's that engaged with you, that he thinks that you can do that.
Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? Shite. Didn't work for me. I don't want you to do that again. And, you know, and people are very opinionated and not awestruck. And they're not, you know, people read it because they want to be entertained. They want to be transported. They don't want to be informed. They don't want to be elevated. They don't want to boast about it. No, at dinner parties, nobody goes to a party and says, yes, I've just read the latest trashy novel by by Penny Dreadful. She's marvellous. You know, nobody ploughs through your book because they feel they ought to.
Yeah.
You know?
You have written, this is originally a true crime podcast, and you have written true crime as well, The Long Drop, about the case of Peter Manuel. Manuel. Yeah, so that's in the 1950s.
Yeah.
So just tell us about that, and tell us about what it was about that you thought, I'm going to invest a year or however long it took of your life to write what was based on that, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, it was, I love true crime, and I read a lot of true crime, and I'm delighted to get your books because I will devour them. And I was reading a true crime book about Peter Manuel in the 50s, and I'd always wanted to write a true crime book, but the ethical conundrums around true crime are really interesting, and they're huge. And, you know, how could you do it? I mean, In Cold Blood, The Executioner's Song, which is a bit of a copycat to In Cold Blood, let's be honest. There are really brilliant, you know, literary true crime books that are not and then you won't believe what happened, and this guy, do you know what I mean? It's not just factual, it's actually making something out of it. And it's not just an investigation. And so I was reading this true crime book, and it was about the murders that Peter Manuel committed. He used to break into houses, kill whole families, and then hang about the house, sometimes for days, feed the cat, move the curtains around and things like that. And I was reading a book about it, and it said the father of the first family who were killed wasn't in the house at the time, and he issued a state. He was arrested, and when he got
charged as well,
he was arrested and charged, but they did nothing on him because he was away fishing. And when he was released, he said, "I'm going to investigate this case. I'm going to turn detective." And he offered money for information. And one of the people that came forward was Peter Manuel, and he offered to give him information for money, but he wanted to meet in a restaurant. And then it said nobody knows what happened that night, and I just started that was the point, and that was what I kept thinking about. Quite often when I'm researching things, I'll do a lot of reading, and then I'll try to remember what's stuck in my mind, and that was the scene that was stuck in my mind.
So just to put yourself in that restaurant where they meet,
what is going on?
Yeah.
So I put on a play about it because I thought this was amazing. And it was lunchtime theatre, right? So a lot of the people who came were older and remembered that case. And people kept catching me at the end because I thought it was just this innocent man who'd met a murderer. And people kept catching me at the end, and they said, you know, the story in Glasgow at the time was that the man knew his family were going to be killed. And when he goes out with Peter Manuel, he's not just an innocent in the headlights. He's actually paying him to shut up.
Wow. Okay.
And the family of one of the women that was murdered that night, the boys, the children, believed that as well. And there were a lot of dodgy things about it, but I just thought there's so much more to this than the story the official story, as you know.
Yeah. The
official story and what can be said without libeling people or upsetting people. So I decided to make it a fictionalised novel, but I mean it's all factual, and a lot of the dialogue is taken from the court case. So the two of them went out in a 12-hour bender, and nobody knows what happened. And the next time they met was in court, and Peter Manuel, being a psychopath, was defending himself. He dismissed his counsel, and he called the man to the stand, and they have this really weird, disjointed conversation about the events of that night and what happened that night. And the bars they went to, so you could actually map all the bars they went to around old Glasgow at the time, and who they met. You could even map who they met. And anyway, so I just thought those two scenes together were so interesting because there's this contrast of what on earth happened. Nobody ever really investigated that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, what does a crime book have to have? You talked about true crime there, or a basis in true crime. What does a true crime, be it a Raymond Chandler, or be it the one that your friend said shite to, or what does it have to have for you to be in it? Is it the crime itself? Is it the procedure? Is it what it shines a light against society? Or does it just have to be a really good story with good characters?
Just a really good story. I mean, I think the pending question, Graham Greene said, is what makes a book. And it's not what you, the writer, are interested in. Very easy mistake to make, shoehorning all your research in. But what is the reader wondering about? That's the thing. And the pending question in The Long Drop was, what happened? The pending question in The Chandler was, you know, why don't they want to find her? The pending question is always the thing that drives the narrative forward, I think. And quite often, my question when I approach a story is, what would that feel like? So my next book is about someone who discovers that her forensic science is junk, and she has to give a talk about a very famous case. What would it feel? Because a lot of forensic science goes out of fashion. You suddenly realise, phrenology is nonsense. Or blood spatter has been misrepresented as an absolute science. It's just an opinion. Fingerprint evidence is opinion. So, you know, what does it feel like when you suddenly realise, my whole career and my whole life has been based on this? Would you denounce yourself? What would that feel like? You know, how do you admit you're wrong when you're older? Which is, you know, kind of universal, you know. as you get older, you'll have seen this, you see things that are wrong, but you don't say anything. Why don't you say anything, and how can we justify not saying anything? Injustices, even things like the housing market. I go to parties all the time and people own loads and loads of houses, which is the reason young people can't buy houses. And you're supposed to congratulate them on having loads of houses instead of saying, you're the cause of homelessness.
You're the cause of house prices. And
people can't have families. Yeah. We're not reproducing because you've got 5 houses. Do you know what I mean? So just all those things you're not supposed to say as you get older, And so it's often, it's often, how would that feel to actually tell the truth?
And when you're writing a crime book, what thought and what research do you give to procedure, to the science, to the forensics, to the courtroom process, to the police procedures as well?
Well, I think a very good thing is find out what your questions are and then find the answer, because research is much easier and it's delicious than actually banging out words that you hate and have to fix. So I would say, if you're doing research, that's a rule I've always made for myself, is find out what the question is as you're going, and try and narrow the question down to something. Don't say, what's it like being in the police? Say, do they have a locker if they're at that grade, or do they have a desk? Do you know what I mean? Just make sure you know exactly what are you asking, because you'll waste an awful lot of time and you won't get a lot done.
That's it. I think Ian Rankin spent months and months and months researching haemophilia for a book that he used about a paragraph about, and he just didn't need it in the end. It wasn't important to the story, frankly.
It's not, and the thing is, you also have to say, this is interesting to me, but is it interesting to anyone else? And is that in there because I'm very invested, because I had a lovely weekend in Milan finding out about that? Or is it integral to the story? You have to be quite brutal with yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Denise Mina, thank you so much for your time. I could carry on chatting to you all day. I think what you've achieved with The Second Murder is absolutely stunning.
Oh, I'm so pleased.
Yeah, and this is from a proper Chandler fan as well.
Yeah, no, I can tell actually. I can tell it matters to you.
Yeah, it does. It's brilliant. A bit of trepidation when I started, but within the first couple of pages, I'm in.
I'm so
chuffed.
In. That's great.
Yeah, fantastic.
You're a potential old geezer.
I am a really old geezer. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was lovely.